So we're at the bottom of 93, verse 38. And it says here, now we're going to finish the Torah portion. We're going to some more nuances of the whole tzarat idea and affliction. It says if a man or woman has spots, and all of this until now has really been man or woman. There'll be something more specific to man next, but it says if a man or woman has spots on the skin of the flesh that are similar to those that can develop into tzarat, meaning that they're white spots, and in some of the commentaries says white spots with little red pimples, whatever it was, a priest must examine them. If there are dark white spots on the skin of the flesh, darker than any of the previously described 4 grades of whiteness that can develop into tzarat, in other words, it's not tzarat. Tzarat had a certain level of whiteness to it. There was a bright white or a dull white, and this is not. This is like they put it, a lack of pigmentation, but it's not clear what it is. It's nothing more than a lack of pigmentation, or that erupts on the skin. In other words, it's more natural. You go see a dermatologist, and he or she is not defiled, even if symptoms characteristic of tzarat later develop within these spots. 94. 94 is about boldness, and this is actually particular to men. Not that women can't become bold, but this is particular to men, and the Torah says it very clearly. It says this is about a man. It says if a man loses all the hair on the back of his head, this is about tzarat on the head. Specifically a place of hair, and it's going to have a different relationship with a different approach to the tzarat there on an area of the body that does not have hair. So if a man loses all the hair on the back of his head, he's unnaturally bald. Therefore, if a lesion that develops on this area of his head, it cannot become defiled by it according to the diagnostic rules governing normally hairy parts of the head, because there we've spoken about areas of tzarat where tzarat develops within the head, and in a hairy part of the body. But this is not, even though this is a head and it's a normally hairy part of the body, since he's bald, it's not dealt with as a tzarat of a hairy part of the body, but of a non-hairy part of the body. Such a lesion is rather diagnosed according to the rules governing lesions on the rest of the body, which were given previously. Similarly, if he loses hair on the side of his head toward his face, including the temples on each side of the head, he's a naturally bald at the front. Therefore, if a lesion develops on this area of his head, it cannot become defiled by it according to the diagnostic rules governing normally hairy parts of the head. Again, such a lesion is rather diagnosed according to the rules governing lesions on the rest of the body, which were given previously. So it's actually a little more lenient without the hair to be able to in how it's treated with such a lesion. Now, just in general, the commentaries do bring the idea that hair has its own corner in how it's seen in Jewish spirituality. And one of the things is that hair, and I think we've discussed it a bit, but not exactly in this context, hair is a little is somewhat unique in that it's part of our body. It grows similar to the nails, but more prominently the hair. It's part of our body and it grows, but it's really not an essential part of the body to the extent that when you cut it off, you don't even feel it. And generally, a part of the body that is cut, there's pain. So obviously, there's no nerves, but it's the idea is that it's something which is, from a perspective, you see it as something that's extra to the body. It's part of the body, but it's an extra. So there are some things which are part of the body excretes and it's gone. This is not to that extent. This is, it comes with us. It's part of our body, but it has that extra element to it. And this, if you notice, and we've spoken in the past, the Kohen, the Levi, when they are the Nazarite, when they're dedicated, there's part of the process is that there's a shaving of the hair. What? So the hair does take up a space. Something about it, and in practical terms, the way I guess you could say the mystics see it, and it is referred to in some of the more classical commentaries on this piece of Torah. Hair refers to a part of the body, to part of life, of the pleasures of life, the enjoyment of life, which is extra. So, for example, I ate breakfast. I'm not hungry right now. I had my yogurt and my granola. I have my seltzer here. I'm good. Same time. So I finish the class. I walk outside, and I see a cookie. I see a piece of chocolate, whatever, something that's, it tastes good. And so I I'll make a blessing, but I just pop it in my mouth. Not because I'm hungry, not because I need it, not because I think it's good for me, but because I want it. That's not a criminal offense, but it's what it is it's exercising a part of my personality, which is I want to do what feels good and not what is good necessarily. Now, again, is there anything immoral about me making a blessing and popping a piece of kosher chocolate in my mouth? No, there's no problem. Same time, if I am more focused on my own personality and my opening and my own internal discipline, then I would be aware that allowing myself to be led down different avenues by my appetites without a proper guidance of my own moral compass of knowing what's the right thing for me, health-wise, or whatever it may be. It's in its narrow sense. So I had a piece of chocolate, but in the scope of my life, what I just did was I added another layer of strength to the muscle of desire, of appetite, and I didn't exercise my self-discipline. That cumulatively, that can be a problem for me. For anyone, one of the biggest moral challenges we face in life is that we follow our impulses, our self-comfort instincts, instead of our higher visionary self-compass. So the idea of the hair, which is, we say, it's a throwaway, it's not necessary. Food is necessary. Nutrition is necessary. And we don't have to be so sparse and have something that doesn't say it's good for us. Have your yogurt and choose the flavor you like, no problem. But the idea is that's all considered more the body of what we need. The hair is when we get into the extras. And that's what the language is. There's a Hebrew word for it. Motorot. It's like the hair is it's extra, in the sense that obviously I'm glad I have hair, but it's in as far as it in its relation to my body, it's something which grows with my body. It's part of my body, but it's an extra. When I cut it off, I don't feel it. So here also, the idea of this person and the tzarat is part of a spiritual struggle. The idea is that when, obviously it means physically, in the sense that there are even these diagrams of when there's baldness, so that area is out, the hair is treated in a way which is actually a little more lenient because of just in the way we described how we deal with a lesion within hair. But it also symbolizes, if we want to read this in a different key, for ourselves and our own issues that we deal with, and we don't have the gift of tzarat anymore, where we can see on our skin that we have something that where we're succumbing to the desire to share interesting gossip, notwithstanding that we're talking about somebody or whatever it may be. That here, without the hair, the Torah is telling us when the hair isn't the issue, it lowers the severity. If that was clear, if not, please ask. So 42. Thus, if a lesion that is either uniformly white or white with red streaks develops on the back or front bald area of such a person's head, is a likely case of tzerat erupting on his back or front bald area. Priest must therefore examine it if there is indeed a lesion on his back or front bald area, and this lesion is either wool white or another of the 4 shades of white, and its whiteness is either uniformly white or white with red streaks, like the appearance of tzerat on the skin of the flesh. The lesion must be subjected to the diagnostic process described previously for a body lesion. If the lesion satisfies any of the diagnostic criteria, then he is a man afflicted with tzerat. He is defiled. The priest must therefore pronounce him defiled on the account of his lesion on his head. So to say defiled, what's important to understand is this is, well, is a word we don't really use much. I don't think, but the idea of it is that there is something we've assimilated, some type of a toxin, and if we have spiritual toxin, then we have to go about ridding ourselves of it. And until we touch food, it's something that one can contract from another. There's an English word for it. Sickness is contagious. It's contagious, but it doesn't mean it's not contagious as in chickenpox. But the idea is that a person in that state who has contracted this spiritual instability, let's call it, needs to get a grip on themselves. And until they do, be careful about their own interactions with other people and other things, because they could convey it to others. So along those lines, we say the next thing is the behavior required of a person afflicted with tzeras. 45. As to what must be done with a person afflicted with any type of tzeras, meaning a person on whom there's a lesion that has been diagnosed as tzeras, his garments must be torn. It's like a person in mourning. Person is publicly. This is something very clear. The lesion has shown me that I have a spiritual challenge that I'm not dealing with correctly, and therefore the garments are torn. The hair on his head must be allowed to overgrow. That is also a person who is in mourning, who's sitting shiva. So they don't cut their hair. Must cover his face with a garment down to his mustache, or for a woman similarly down to the upper lip, which was that these two, just in other words, to I don't know if it means physically that's why, but necessarily, because that's not practiced. But the idea is that they're subdued, and call out that loud, defiled, so people will know to stay away from it. So first of all, the language here is that he calls out defiled, in its simple context. It means that if he's around people and he's actually supposed to seclude himself or go outside the camp, but until he does, as he's walking around, he makes it clear from the way, or she, from the way that, like as though they were in mourning, and says defiled. In other words, make sure not to touch me or to have actual physical interaction with me. There's in the Hebrew of how it's written, as it says, and defiled, he will call out. And he calls out defiled. There is a pretty commonly quoted insight into these words, commonly quoted by more spiritual guides over the centuries. The words defiled, he will call out. If you want to look at the strict language of the Torah, so that there is a tendency of people, and the Talmud talks about it, that when we know a weakness that we have, whether we're conscious about it or not, we tend to see it more in others. We tend to be sensitive to seeing in others our own flaws in others, whether or not we've even admitted that it's to ourselves that it's a flaw, but we're sensitive to it. That's a psychological insight, and I think it's supported by your modern psychological minds too, that we're sensitive to that, and therefore we notice it in others, and it's a certain trigger. And sometimes what we dislike most in others is what we secretly dislike in ourselves. So part of it is that here we say defiled equals when a person has a problem, they tend to point it out in others. Maybe unfairly, maybe they're blowing it out of proportion. But in the language of the Talmud, when a person invalidates an other, they're usually invalidating them with their own personal blemish. And it's a like I say, it's a psycho-spiritual insight. See, when we see that something about someone else triggers us, it behooves us to quietly look at ourselves and say, is this something that I actually can find in myself? And maybe unbeknownst to me, it bothers me.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Is it the same with positive traits, like that we feel that are good traits in ourselves? Do we see that in others as well?
I think I would think that we probably could, and we would. I think that I think we're probably more sensitized to it. I think we pick it up, but I think what the Talmud's pointing out is that probably will take up more space in us, will bother us. I'm not sure that when we see our good trait in someone else is necessarily going to make us feel proud of them or happy. We may notice it more because we're familiar with that vibe. But here saying it stirs us up emotionally, and I think the tendency would be more to be stirred up emotionally by something that bothers us in someone else and bothers us in ourselves than by something that we saw that's good. But I don't know that we get to all that emotional by seeing something good in someone else. They trigger when we say triggered by someone, usually it's by something negative. Although yes, it could be that we're overwhelmed by the beauty we see in someone else. But I think it's more common to have our buttons pushed when it's someone's exhibiting a behavior or done something, an action that we don't like. And the Talmud's telling us that, take a look and see if there's a whisper of that in ourselves.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so let's just look at what does it say? This person will remain, it's 46, all the way to the right, the scripture continues, will remain defiled as long as the lesion remains upon him. Since he's defiled on account of tzara, this also goes for a woman. He must, unlike a person defiled in any other way, dwell isolated from other people, including other defiled persons, and his dwelling must be outside the camp. When he will be later be organized into 3 concentric camps, because they had 3 camps: the central camp, and then with the Levites and the Israelites, must dwell outside all 3. This is a just, corrective, reciprocal punishment for having caused the rift between married couples or friends through the gossip or slander. So here we get to some of the meat of what is where the Charat wants to lead the person on a spiritual level or a psychological level, is this seclusion. It's what's not called seclusion. It's more the exclusion. Is meant to stir up feelings of appreciation for friends, for community, for people. That so when a person is alone, and we experienced for too long during COVID, the idea of seclusion. For many of us, hopefully, it created more of an appreciation for the beauty of being able to just be with friends and with community. Because right, absence makes the heart grow fonder. And here, since this person with Sarat, who we said isn't a bad person, but they got loose with the idea of just of sharing and speaking about others, whether it's at a cocktail event or at work. So they didn't exhibit the appreciation for the fact that we can be together, that we can have people. I mean, I still struggle. I was speaking with someone over Shabbos, someone who works remotely, and asking how does this work with with a culture, a business culture, a company culture. And he said that's really the challenge, is to get a lot of work done, but there isn't the family. It's much harder to cultivate on Zoom, especially if someone you've never met in the flesh. You don't know each other. And when eventually the whole company is like that and no one really has ever met, it becomes it's the human bonds are a real thing. And it's here the idea of the one with Sarat to be outside the camps was a time. It was an exercise for him to think and to feel more deeper appreciation for the beauty of community, the beauty of being with people, and then to be able to soak in that his or her conduct and how they spoke, even if they didn't physically hit anyone or hurt anyone, they never would have thought of doing that, but they did hurt. And they helped plant seeds of division in community. And that's what this is all about, to appreciate the beauty of community and say that we're community, even if we disagree on taste or on politics. We're not going to allow things to get between us, because there's the value of community. And one of the things that it says here is that he has to be, the English should be, must dwell isolated. So there's two, and that everyone's pointed this out. I'm surprised that they don't bring anything here, but that there's two elements to this, conceivably. This person with Sarat is carrying this ritual impurity, and therefore, for the sake of protecting the community, he or she shouldn't be walking around touching things or hugging people or so on, because, as I say, there's this contagious idea, and therefore, conceivably, the idea of them going outside the camp is not about them being secluded, it's about protecting people. So in order not to be around people, ergo, from that, we say, okay, so you have to be outside the camps. But it's not that we need you outside the camps. We just need you, if you're in a box, then maybe it's okay. But the Torah also is specific in saying that not only that he has to go outside the camps, but he should be dwelling isolated. And dwelling isolated can mean something in Jewish law. Like, for instance, is it okay if I somehow I've set up an electric fence around my house and no one can come in and I'm not going out, and is that okay? Or what about if I am going outside, but there's a few people at Sarat? So we have a Sarat club outside the community, the three camps, the community environs, and lots of people speak negatively. So we actually were having fun. There's the Tzaraat bowling league. We have our own little group. Torah says the language of Torah is to dwell isolated. The Hebrew word would probably badad would be alone, because the aloneness is another is an important part of this. It's not just about protecting against a spreading of this spiritual contagion. It's about feeling loneliness, because feeling loneliness, it's an important feeling to have, hopefully for not too long, but to feel loneliness is to help us more acutely appreciate connectedness, to appreciate relationships, to appreciate family, friends, community. And the Torah wants this Matzorah, this person with Sarat, to be alone, to recognize, so that there is this more acute message of there's a gift of relationships, a gift of connections with at so many different levels, and I have to value it, not take it for granted, and not act in a way which really unthinkingly usually is really driving wedges between people, whether myself and others or between two other people. So hanging out with other people at Sarat would be violating this idea where it says that they should really be living alone and independently, because we don't want to lose that effect, the psychological effect. Okay. So now we go into final stretch. The Torah portion, I'm quite sure we'll finish it today. And it's the Sarat on garments. Now, this is something that Maimonides and Nachmanides and other of their age all point out as totally miraculous, supernatural type of thing. The idea of lesions on the body is in and of itself is not a supernatural thing that happens. These were supernatural lesions, but they're lesions on a house. I mean, I guess there's mold, but this, they say, this was like totally just a supernatural idea on the garments. And as I mentioned before, oh, someone's asking a question. I can't see who it is. Yolanda?
Yes.
Yes.
When you have Sarat, do you have symptoms other than what it shows on the skin?
No, it's what it shows on the skin. But actually, someone asked last week, I believe, whether there's pain. Maybe it was you. Whether I'm pretty sure someone here asked last week or 2 weeks ago whether there's pain that comes with the Sarat. And I could not think of anywhere that it says that it was pain. It was more about the discoloration than the image. In looking through just over this past week, not actually trying to answer that question, but looking at other things, I did come across language in some of the early commentators which indicate that there was a discomfort from this skin lesion. It was all about the skin lesion. The symptom was the skin lesion, but the lesion was not only, the symptom wasn't only visual, but they could feel it. It didn't feel comfortable. Not that it was, it doesn't say it was extremely painful, but it was an uncomfortable feeling. So the way we're told is that really it started off in the house, and then on the clothing, then into the body. But the house, and we'll get to the house in the next Torah portion, but Sarat on the garments, which we're going to talk about now, that wouldn't hurt. It would be visible. We'd have a clue that we have to deal with things, but God is sparing us the physical discomfort, giving us a sign, and we have to look in life, look through signs for where we're slipping up, because if we don't read the tea leaves in that way, it'll usually come closer to home until we can't ignore it anymore, and that sometimes is a little uncomfortable for us when we start recognizing what what we're bringing out upon ourselves. So Tzarat on garments. As for the laws regarding a garment that has the lesion of Tzarat upon it, these laws apply only to lesions on woolen garments, linen garments, on threads prepared to be used as the warp or the woof of linen or wool garments, on unworked leather, or on anything made from leather. So, 49. If the lesion on the garment, on the warp woof threads, on the leather garment, or on any other article covers at least an area equivalent to a square, each of whose sides are equal to the diameter of a ceiling beam, and is pure green or pure red on the garment, it is a lesion of tzarat and must therefore be shown to the priest. The priest must examine the lesion, confirm that it is of the required color and size, and quarantine the article with the lesion for 7 days. He must examine the lesion on the 7th day. If the lesion has spread on the garment, the warp woof threads, the leather garment, or any article made from leather. In other words, not just a garment, but it's a pocketbook. The lesion is an onerous tzarat lesion, and that the article's owner will suffer inconvenience and monetary loss on this account. That's why it's the language of it, onerous. Since it is ritually defiled, it may no longer be used. Rather, we must burn the garment, the warp threads of wool, or whatever other article has the lesion upon it, since the lesion is an onerous tzarat lesion. Nevertheless, only the wool, linen, or leather must be burned and destroyed in fire. If the hems of the garment are made out of a different material, they need not be destroyed. Before it is burned, this afflicted article is ritually defiled to the same degree as a man who has suffered 2 or more discrete non-seminal discharges, because there's a scale of these different types of ritual impurity, and they happen to share the same, which will be discussed in detail later. We're going to get to that next Torah portion. But if the priest examines the lesion, and the lesion has not spread on the garment, the warp of threads, or whatever leather article is on, the priest must order that the part of article in which the lesion is located be washed, and he must quarantine it again for 7 days. The entire article need not be washed, only the area containing the lesion and the adjacent parts. Okay, so there is, even though it's not in the body, there's a discomfort in that, in a world that wasn't that wealthy, losing a garment, burning something, that hurt. And here it may come to that.
I have a,
Yeah.
here it implies with the onerous lesion that actually as a result of the tzarat, that you're going to have a loss or an inconvenience. In other words, that something bad will happen to you.
And that's just the way I also felt a little bit of that.
Is that what it's?
No, that's just the way they worded it, which I think probably wasn't the best way, because I thought they were going in the same direction. It's not that, and because they're bringing from Rashi. The point is that it's onerous in that this sweater of mine that has tzarat is not going to have, now it's going to be burned. That's misfortune for me. I don't have my sweater. Well, I have to buy a new one.
Okay, so it's not saying you will have a future misfortune.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
But I understand how the words led you there, because as I was reading, I was thinking, what are they talking about here? And then I saw that's not exactly what they're saying. It's not forecasting anything. It's saying that here it's going to be impacting when it's on the body. It's on the body, and then you wait and it's gone, and then you're done. But when it's on something like this, you actually have to be losing something that has financial value. Okay. So now the 7th, final reading of this Torah portion. It says, then the priest must examine the article after the lesion has been washed and quarantined for a 2nd week. If the lesion has not changed its color by turning a lighter or darker shade of red or green, and the lesion has either not spread at all or has spread but not covered the entire article, it is defiled. You must burn it in a fire, for it is now clear that the lesion is a deep-looking lesion on the worn or new article. If, however, the discolored lesion spreads over the entire article, it thereby becomes rid of this defilement. If the lesion does not spread but changes in color from pure red to pure green or vice versa, it must either be treated as a new lesion and quarantined or be pronounced defiled. 96, the last page of this Torah portion. But if the priest examines the article after it has been washed and quarantined for a 2nd week, and the lesion has turned a lighter or darker shade of red or green, he must rip it out of the garment, the leather, or the root warp or woof threads, and burn that part of the article that was ripped out. If the lesion reappears on the garment, then the warp or threads or any other article, it is a recurrent growth. Must burn it in fire the entire article upon which the lesion is found. Regarding any garment, warp or with threads, are a leather article that you wash by order of the priest, quarantined for a second week, and from which the lesion then disappears entirely. It must be immersed a second time. This time not to be washed, but to be purified in a mikveh. We'll actually put clothing in a mikveh, and then it will be rid of this defilement. This is the law governing the diagnosis of a lesion of tzarat on a woolen or linen garment, warp or with threads, or any leather article, according to which it becomes rid of defilement or defilement. Okay, so that includes the Torah portion that's known as Tazria. Now, I also sent you page 101, which is an overview of the next Torah portion. Now, both these two Torah portions, most years they're read together, Tazria and Metzora. So even though they are two separate Torah portions, and sometimes we do read them separately, they have a connection in content and a connection in fact that because both of them talk about this tzarat, but really a connection in our practice because Tazria and Metzora are commonly read together. Okay. What does Metzora mean? This Torah portion. The name of this parsha, Metzora, means a person afflicted with tzarat. A Metzora is a person. Tzarat is a disease, an affliction. So a Metzora is a person who has tzarat. So tzarat, as we saw in the previous parsha, Tazria, what is tzarat? It's a condition that imparts ritual impurity, thereby denying the afflicted person entrance to the temple, and denying them any involvement in its rituals, and they're also prevented from social life of the community. What does that mean? Separated from the temple, the locus of life, and godliness, which is the source of life, and the life of the community, the Metzora is, in the sage's words, a walking metaphor for death. Not the person's dead. But the language of Talmud is that a Metzora represents death in the sense that they're unplugged from life. They're unplugged from people, they're unplugged from social life. They can't go to the temple. They can't go to a synagogue. They can't go to sushi and wine. They're unplugged. And in that sense, we find the connectedness as being plugged into life. And the disconnectedness, again, it's a harsh word to use, and noticing that they're dead, but they emblemise being a dead man walking, the idea that we could be alive and really unplugged from life. Although the word Metzora is indeed one of the first words in the parsha, so the Torah portion, the name we give the Torah portion is always one of the first words in the Torah reading. But we want to look and say, don't want to make it so just functional. We just pick a word, and when it's the title of a Torah portion, there has to be some connection between the title and the substance of what we're going to be reading. Right? Title of the book certainly has that. You expect that, and even from Torah portions where you look and say, really, they're just trying to distinguish between one and the next, and we pick the first unique word out, which is truthfully what's being done. But what the Rebbe's perspective on this, and this book certainly represents the Rebbe's perspective, was that nothing's just so shallow in Torah thought. If they picked a word, if our sages picked a word to be a title for a Torah portion, it has to be more than just we found the first unique word, but it has to be something they saw as really reflecting the soul of the Torah portion. And sometimes you have to understand that. So although the word Metzora is indeed one of the first, the actual subject of the first third of the parsha is the process by which the Metzora becomes cured of Tzarat. We're going to get into now the negation of the condition of being a Metzora. We just spoke a lot about how to analyze, how to diagnose the Tzarat, and then what happens to the person. Here, in this Torah portion, we're going to talk about the curing of it. So it's calling, saying, this is, assuming Tzarat was leprosy, calling this the leper Torah portion is a little misleading because you think about probably how they got to be a leper, their behavior that brought it about, the diagnosis. This is about the cure of the leper. It's more of a healing Torah portion than about the condition itself. The subject of the next third of the parsha is sarat that afflicts a house, and how an afflicted house is purified as defilement. So it's not a mitzorah. Mitzorah is a person, and here we're talking about a house. And the subject of the final third of the parsha is two additional but unrelated forms of defilement and the process of purification of them. We're still going to stay within the ritual defilement arena, but not about sarat. So how does mitzorah, which means a person who has sarat, how does that word encapsulate this Torah portion? Given the debilitating nature of sarat, it seems odd that a parsha devoted to curing an individual of this condition should be named after the one afflicted by it. We're going to call attention to the explanation we gave of the name of the previous parsha. In the overview to Tazria, the Torah portion we just finished today, that we said can serve to explain the name of this parsha as well. If we think the thinking that we brought up in Tazria is going to help us here in Mitzvah. What was the thinking I spoke about in Tazria? Tazria means to plant, to sow. Because it spoke about a woman who has become impregnated and has a baby, and there was a bris, and then we got into, that was just the very beginning of the Torah portion, then we got into the whole tzaraat thing. So what did we explain? What's the point of Tazria? This idea of sowing, planting, of seeding. The Parshat Tazria named after the act of sowing, the act of optimistically embarking on a process leading to new life and new growth. That's what Tazria is. That's what the word means. Even though the bulk of the parsha is focused on the particulars of the life negating the disease of tzaraat. So it seems exactly the opposite. Tazria is that the woman is giving birth to a new baby. All right, she has conceived. That's beautiful. It's new life. She's giving birth. You do that if you're planting new. It's a spring, and you're planting new roses. There's new life. There's newness to it. There's excitement to it. There's freshness to it. And that's the title we give to a Torah portion. Talks about someone who has this disease, this affliction, which really reflects on being. It's a emblematic of death. It's unplugged from life. So why is that? Because, as we mentioned in the other overview, because the tzaraat is not intended as a punishment, but as a new beginning, an impetus to reaffirm life. It's such it can and should indeed be seen as sowing the seeds of a new, higher level of living. If a person, God forbid, has a medical event, which is a challenge, but it helps them understand, him or her understand, that it's time to change diet, time to change lifestyle, and that we can deal with this, we can overcome it, but now it's time to become to kick up the level of my lifestyle a little bit, where I'm more attuned to giving my body what it truly needs and taking care of my body. So the lesson was unpleasant because there was a medical event. God forbid, none of us should have it. But on the other hand, that sometimes that medical event is sowing the seeds of new frontiers in life. Where now we start to realize that maybe the things I was doing was not so good for me. I was doing it because I could get away with it, I thought. And I was young and stupid, or whatever it was. And now I'm realizing I have to be a little bit more mature, and choose my pleasures with thinking about what's best for my body and my soul. So then, sometimes the tzaraat, as we discussed a few times in the last Torah portion, the tzaraat in a way was a gift. It wasn't a pleasant experience, but it was a launch for a better perspective on life. So in that sense, it was sowing the seeds of a new me. So tazria, the word for sowing seeds, sowing, does apply to a Torah portion talks about tzaraat, because tzaraat as the experience did sow the seeds of change. Similarly, Parshat Metzora is named after the person afflicted with this malady, despite the fact that the bulk of the parsha is focused on how to extricate the sufferer from it. Because the purification process is nothing more than a continuation of the condition itself. That is the next step in the rehabilitative process that began with the original contraction of the condition. So therefore, the idea that we're going Metzora, this is all about this. The Torah portion talks about the person who has tzarat. The idea is that tzarat itself wasn't just about the affliction. It wasn't just about the pain. It wasn't just about the seclusion. It was about the experience of growth. It started off with the discomfort of the lesion. It went through the hoops with the Kohen and the being diagnosed and the seclusion. But the big picture of Metzora isn't all dark. There's beauty to it. It's about the growth and the healing, both the physical healing and the spiritual healing, the spiritual growth. So that works very well into this Torah portion, because we're going to talk about how to cure the person. Well, it's not only about getting rid of the lesion, it's about the cure also means the unfolding of the soul and the lessons of the unpleasant experience of Tzarat. Take this a little further. The bottom of 101, it says, one of the idioms the prophets used to describe the redemptive process, and even the Messiah himself, is that of sprouting. The idea of new growth, even the Jews coming out of Egypt, we're talking about Passover. That idea is Ezekiel talks about the birth of the birth of a child, the birth of a new nation, the springtime, its growth. These are all idioms, metaphors for the idea of what we experience in Mashiach, because that's the ultimate type of leaving Egypt. So at the top of 102, we have a verse that says, for as the earth sends forth its growth, and as a garden sprouts its seedlings, so will God cause righteousness and praise to sprout in the presence of all the nations. So that, we had that in Isaiah, where you look at a plot of ground, it's dirt. But properly treated, the gardener brings out the richness of what is hidden, what's latent in that plot of soil, and all of a sudden we have daffodils or whatever we're planting. So there's a sprouting forth. It's new life, because the conditions are right and we properly treated it. So that's what happens. He's there talking about Mashiach. It can happen individually before that, where goodness comes to the fore and sprouts. Another verse, it says, behold, days are coming, says God, when I'll raise up a righteous sprout from David, and which means that's the Messiah, and the king will reign and prosper, and he will administer justice and righteousness in the land. In addition, the sages of the Talmud say that the Messiah's epithet, the title used for him, is the Metzora of the house of Rabbi Judah the Prince. The sages of the Talmud say, because they were the time of Rabbi Judah the Prince, he was a spectacular leader of the Jewish people, and Rabbi, the rabbis of the Talmud said that Mashiach is going to be like coming out of the house of Judah the Prince, but he's going to be a Metzora, a person with Tzarat. Citing the verse, and they go to Isaiah 53. It says, in truth, there was our illnesses that he bore, and that talks about the Mashiach. Isaiah 53 indicates it's either a chapter about us or about Mashiach. And our pains he carried, but we regarded him as a Metzora, smitten by God and afflicted. The Talmud even records an episode in which the Messiah is seen in the guise of Metzora. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, we're told, met Elijah the prophet standing at the entrance to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai's cave. He asked Elijah, when will the Messiah come? So Elijah said, go ask him yourself. Well, go ask Messiah, the Messiah himself. Where is he sitting? At the entrance to the city, Elijah says. And so he asked Elijah, what sign will I be able to recognize? It says he is sitting among the destitute people afflicted with Tzarat. The Messiah is sitting with the poor people and those afflicted with sickness. But whereas the others first loosen all their bandages, and then after treating all their sores, retie them, he unties and reties his bandages one at a time, thinking, perhaps I will be summoned at any moment to feel myself as the Messiah, and if so, I must not be delayed by having to rebandage any sores. So he paints a picture, Tom paints a picture of a Messiah who's waiting any moment to be able to be triggered, to be for the sign from God to bring a better world. So we have seen why the Messiah of all possible manifestations assumes the garb of Metzora. But in this context, it is possible to interpret the names of the two parties. We spoke about it earlier in the Torah portion about the interpretation of the let's look at this remind myself what they did here, what they told us last time, 32. In the note. I'll find it here. But I do remember remember exactly which angle they took. Yeah. The next time we meet, I'll look just to what they're referring to. It's in this context, it is possible to interpret the names of the two parshiot that discuss Tzarat as referring to the process of redemption. Tazria means sow. First, the work we do to cause redemption to sprout. And Metzora refers to the Messiah himself. Thus, the phrase Tazria Metzora allegorically means sow the seeds of the messianic redemption. So in most years, the two parshiot of Tazria and Metzora are combined in the public reading of the Torah in the synagogue. In the allegorical context just mentioned, this teaches us that we must view our efforts to refine the world through studying the Torah, fulfilling its commandments, not only as ends unto themselves, which they certainly are, inasmuch as we are instructed to fulfill God's commandments out of devoted obedience, but also as the means by which we hasten the advent of the Messiah. We must not dissociate our Tazria, our sowing from the Torah, its messianic goals. I'm going to leave it here because this is a bigger conversation that I think is important. And so we'll when we reconvene, God willing, next week, we'll get into not only the Metzora Mashiach connection, but really about the lesson that we want to derive from the connection of these two Torah portions, both Tazria and Metzora. So I apologize, it's not going to work. Time was now, and I wish I had remembered more of what we mentioned earlier on about the Mashiach and Tzara. Is there any questions?
Thank you very much.
No?
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
I give you one.
Thank you.